Have you ever sat down to read a book and wondered why words look the way they do? Of course not. If that was the case, you wouldn't be mindlessly scrolling through YouTube. But I am happy you're mindlessly scrolling through YouTube because welcome to my new channel. Why do we say the exact words we do with the exact finite amount of consonants and vowels with a seemingly infinite amount of words? Today, I'm going to try and unpack the history of the English language. Well, not all today, because that's a very long task. I'm going to kind of give a brief description of how writing first surfaced, and in future videos kind of go on to how that has created the English language as we know it today. However, I am a writer, so I personally would like to do so through the lens of literature. The book we will start with in the series is the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it is the oldest book ever written. How old is it really? Well, it's older than the history of writing itself, because it kind of invented that. So just about old enough to win a Senate seat. I need to find like another camera because I can see myself too much in this one. And then I'm just gonna be messing with my hair the whole time. And my bangs especially. The Epic of Gilgamesh will start there. It starts with the king Gilgamesh, and he's a pretty bad king. Everyone's like, you suck. And so the gods are like, all right, we're gonna boot you out. And they create Enkidu. And Enkidu becomes Gilgamesh's BFF, so they really showed him. When Enkidu first gets there, he is wild. He needs to be tamed, as most men do. Enkidu is in the woods being very wild and doing all of his like little wild man stuff. He is sent a prostitute named Shamat, and they have sex, and essentially it like tames him. This also starts the theme of women being used as kind of a tool or as a plot device, or especially as like their sexual desires or for the sexual desires of men. Gilgamesh is also 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. I don't really know how that ancestry works, but I'm guessing it's like two of his grandparents on his dad's side or mom's side, whatever, were gods, and then like the other set were one was a god and then one was I don't know, I swear I'm gonna have to get out like a Punnett square. So Enkidu and Gilgamesh are together, BFFs for life, and they just like go around fighting monsters, you know, doing that BFF activities, the normal ones. They slay Humbaba, which is one of the monsters, and they slay so many that the goddess Ishtar comes down and is like, oh, Gilgamesh, hey. And he's like, no, and he rejects her. And she's also thought to be kind of a predecessor to the divine goddess Aphrodite in Greek mythology. I think one thing that carries over is what happens when that goddess is rejected. She sends a wild boar from heaven. Enkidu and Gilgamesh actually kill it, but that doesn't really matter. And Enkidu is killed by the gods for his wrongdoing. For me, it's so interesting because obviously every single part of a myth is incorporated to reflect that part of society. So right now we're looking at this and we're like, this doesn't plot-wise make total sense, but it obviously reflects something so much deeper in their society of why they killed the boar and then had the gods do this. In Sumer, there was a belief in divine rule, and the kings were supposed to be descendants of the gods, which feels like nepotism to me. But Enkidu's death for me, so he is supposed to represent nature since he's such a wild man in the beginning and gets tamed by humanity, by Shamat. Gilgamesh's mistakes being directly responsible for Enkidu's death at the hands of the gods. It reflects to me the king being in connection with the gods, and if the king does something that angers the gods, that's why there's floods, that's why there's all these natural disasters. And the other kind of connection between Enkidu and Gilgamesh for me has got to be, no, we'll get back to that, because I don't know what I'm saying. That's okay. After Enkidu's death, Gilgamesh is sad. But he's not only sad, he's kind of scared. This is the first time he's ever really faced this question of mortality, especially so close to him. So he goes to one man he knows named Utnapishtim, who survived a flood, very similar to the biblical flood, if you are aware of that. But I want to get into kind of the connections between flood stories in literature. Maybe in a later video, let me know if you would want to see that. But he goes to Utnapishtim and he asks him how to become immortal, and Utnapishtim tells him only the gods can be immortal, which lame. Which actually, I would not want to be immortal. I don't know if that's like a hot take or if people agree with that, but being immortal sounds awful. I barely want to be alive now. With this revelation from Utnapishtim, Gilgamesh has to kind of reconcile with his mortality and accept that he is going to die one day, as we all do. The way he actually kind of finds the ability to reconcile with this is through the ideas of legacy. And that brings us to another one of our themes of mortality versus legacy. Because for him, he's trying to actually literally live forever, but he realizes like his stories and his legacy can live on forever. And something that we see later in literature with Shakespeare talking about keeping somebody alive through writing. That is essentially an abridged version of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now let's get into kind of how this story was created. Not really in the sense of how people kind of came up with these myths, but kind of how they reflected the innovations the society was going through. And also how the story was literally written down and how that emerged and started in civilization. The epic was first told orally around 3000 BCE to 25,000 BCE, but the first written recording of it was not actually the 12 tablets that we read today, but something written in 21,000 BCE called, what is it? Actually, Gilgamesh and the Hulupu tree? Wait, it is called Gilgamesh and the Hulupu tree. For me, something that was really odd about the whole thing about this is like how fast it went from being orally told to being written down in poetic form. And even though Gilgamesh was just kind of character in that poem, it's just really soon for me. However, I think it's just because all of these inventions that the story is based around kind of started happening at the same, like had to be invented for the story to make sense. The emergence of civilization is kind of reflected in the story of the Epic of Gilgamesh because it all reflects the innovations that ancient Sumer was making at the time. So let's start with location. We are in Sumer, which is a bunch of city-states, kind of like the Greek Empire, but way before. Sumer was nestled in between the Tigris and the Euphrates River in the Fertile Crescent, which is what I'm hoping we'll call the moon in 200 years. Before Sumer, a lot of humans were part of nomadic tribes, but as the Neolithic Revolution happened and they started farming and they were like, hey, that's pretty cool, they started settling down in permanent homes. And with those permanent homes were permanent settlements. And so then when people died, you could give them this burial mound without just kind of being like, well, we're never going to really see it again. And then funeral mounds transformed into entire temples and entire buildings. And then we have the ziggurat. It was very exciting. It got like one layer, and then just for like a little extra excitement, they added just like a little temple on top. And so it was pretty crazy. But this shows us the emergence of a city-state. Without having to look for food, they had a lot of time on their hands, but once they found themselves a bunch of cool trad wives to make a bunch of TikToks about them and their homestead lives, they were good. And then the population exploded. I don't think I need to explain that. Soon humans had enough people to make entire cities. Ooh, ooh. So now they had this surplus of food, and as anyone who's ever been to Trader Joe's know, food sells everything. Just don't think about overpopulation. So there were three main, really major cities in Sumer, and that is Ur, Uruk, and Kish. And I am probably massacring every single one of those, but we're going to focus on Uruk. Uruk is where Gilgamesh's story takes place, and obviously with the emergence of a ziggurat, we now can have power structure and religion, which actually predecessed the ziggurat, but you know what? Details. Who cares? It's only history. We're going to get back to the ziggurat later when we get to the history of writing, because those were pretty instrumental in its creation. All right. Welcome back. I have a microphone now because I wanted to feel like a real YouTuber, so this is authenticity. We are going to summarize that power structure that we talked about before, and we start with farmers, because the farmers have to make the grain. We have the builders, who have to build the ziggurat for grain storage. We have the scribes to record grain storage. We need kings to oversee the whole production. Priests to talk to the gods, which are the way the king gets power, and also holder of the ziggurat. And this honestly is actually like a little wrong, because the king should probably be above the priest, but just in the way that it flowed, I had to do that. So you know what? You guys can appreciate it. There seems to be something hidden under this whole idea of society. What could it be? Oh wow. It's women. So glad that's changed so much in our modern society. And yes, I did draw on boobs to her because I had to deal with the endless amount of fan service Ishtar pictures, and so you get to see what it's like to have someone purposefully try to sexualize a drawing. Okay, So I also have my little Dance Moms pyramid, and it is shocking the amount of effort that Abby Lee Miller put into bullying little girls, because this took a long time. So the way I've kind of narrated this story is through the lens of writing and all that, but that kind of discredits all of the oral traditions. And we already had to have a lot of human innovations to develop the human mouth to talk as much as we do. That helped us create our oral traditions of telling stories. Clearly, we did pretty good because we beat every other type of human, so So since this development of the human mouth, and I think it was like our glands had to develop and all that, I really don't know that much about biology. The thing that's so crazy to me about oral traditions is like this whole 12 tablet story with all these different parts, and how can they memorize all that? They can't, and a lot of it gets lost throughout all the ages. So then we have kind of our version of the Epic of Gilgamesh, but it's important to note that there's probably a ton lost or a ton that was dropped, and it changes how it's perceived. So the ziggurat, that is the center of innovation. And our scribes are going to be outside of the ziggurat, recording, meticulously taking little notes and drawing little pictures about which grain is coming in and what's going out. They make pictures to represent things. And this is the representation of grain, because the rest of the cuneiform? I don't know. The rest of the drawings I'm going to show you are reference to grain in general. I'm not a good drawer, so you're going to have to bear with me. It's portraying, this is an image of something that we can see, and it has details in it, and we know that it's grain. But this is hard. And I get human innovation coming from pure laziness, because you know what? That makes sense to me. That is the most logical conclusion. So they simplify the drawings into kind of more simple things, and even over time, they get even more simplified. I'm gonna go on a little tangent here about the evolution of writing. Basically should be the name of this video. There's 3 developments in the evolution of writing, and that's pictographs, which represent an idea, logographs that I did not prepare for. You can't really see it, but those are tally marks, and so you can read it. And this says, I have 5 pieces of grain, 5 grain stalks, grain fields. But beyond the logographs, we also have ideographs, which are the simplified pictures of the drawings. It represents the idea, but it's not trying to be true depiction of the plant. Like my true depiction of shamat, obviously a pictograph, because it's so realistic, versus an ideograph like this. And here's where drawing gets tricky. The next innovation also has to kind of do with laziness. So see, it's not just us Americans. I didn't have any printer paper for my pyramid, so I have to use my resumes. Scribes write originally top to bottom, but as they're doing that, they erase major sections of tablet, especially as they start writing more and more and more. So they try and create a solution for this. And one thing they can do is start doing it to the left and tallying, marking this way. And that's how we have our modern innovation for how to read. But the symbols they're making, people are used to reading them like this. And so they see them and they're kind of like warped and whatever because it's to the side now, and they're like, no, we're not learning a new way to read. The scribes decide that they are going to tally mark this way and all like that, but they turn the picture so that they can tally mark this way, but then when you turn it, the picture to themselves still looks the same, or vice versa. I think people can read it like this way, and the scribes can read it like that way. But this distorts the pictures obviously even more. Then this gets simplified even more as scribes start writing more and more, and we have this horrible drawing. This picture gets simplified into just lines and squares and wedges. It gets simplified even more to create that. And now we have our cuneiform, which all started from there. This creates the idea of symbols meaning words, and that is the origins of writing. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and please come back for the next one. Obviously, I'm very new to all this, so if anyone watching this has any suggestions or things that I said that were wrong or anything like that, please let me know, because I definitely want to improve. But I really hope you guys enjoyed, and have a good day. Bye!